Hi friends, I hope all is well. This is the third and final video in this series where I collage on top of existing ground layers. I created the ground layers in the video 30 Simple Ways to Start a Collage. I'll link that video along with parts 1 and 2 in the description area if you haven't watched them or want to refer back. I couldn't match this ground layer with a 4.5 by 6 inch inspirational collage, so I looked back at my list of different compositions to see if I could find one that I could use as a reference for this ground layer. The closest one that I thought would fit would be the compound curve composition. Examples are S-shape, zigzag, or multiple curves. I chose this composition because the bleeding tissue papers form loose multiple curve shapes. I decided to keep the design simple because I really like the colors of the bleeding tissue paper and wanted to leave most of it showing. Bright monoprinted pattern papers are being torn, then glued around the two sections of the bleeding tissue paper. The bright paper will contrast with the muted color of the tissue paper. This will help to elevate the simple design. Also, I'll be only using 3 different color papers, which will help as well. I'll add music while you watch me finish this simple collage, then I'll come back to discuss it and the grayscale version. Besides the contrast of color, having torn pieces of bright monoprinted papers while the bleeding tissue papers are large pieces adds contrast to the design. It's a simple design, but I think it's a good one. If I create a collage with a similar design but larger, then I would introduce more bright papers in different sizes and colors. As you can see in the grayscale version, there isn't much contrast of value, mostly mid to dark values, and that's okay. Mid to dark values convey emotions such as sadness or moodiness. Since this is an abstract collage, color plays a large role in evoking emotion. We're back to using a 4.5 by 6 inch collage as inspiration. This one was an obvious choice since it has a similar painted deli paper. I pulled similar but not all the same monoprinted papers for this new collage. partly because I didn't have all the same paper available, and partly because I didn't want it to be a direct copy of the inspirational collage. It will have a similar look. Like the previous collage, I want as much of the existing ground layer showing in the finished collage. One of the things I wanted to copy from the inspirational collage is having mostly large torn elements. As you'll see soon, I did include sections of small torn elements for contrast. Besides using color and values for contrast, having elements in different sizes and shapes will add to that as well. This 8 by 11 inch collage is similar enough to the inspirational collage that both could be included in the same series, but different enough to stand on their own. Both have elements in different sizes, shapes, and values, which makes for a good design. As opposed to the previous collage, this one leans towards mostly light value. I wanted to use this inspirational collage design pretty much as it is to see how it will look larger. Since the ground layer is 8 by 11 inches, there's room to add more elements if needed. Like with collages 6 in part 1 and 19 in part 2, I'm going to use the book pages ground layer as the large element. This time I decided to paint freehand the shape instead of using a template. It's a simple shape, so I don't think it's necessary to use a template or draw the shape with a pencil first. I find that when freehanding, it's best to start painting the shape slightly larger than you want. This way you have room to go back in and correct a section if needed without making the finished shape smaller than you want it to be. Also, like collages 6 and 19, I'm using an angle brush to paint the initial shape, then come back in with a larger flathead brush to paint the rest of the area. One more thing, like those other collages, I'm not applying the pink paint too heavily. I want some of the book pages to show through. At this point, I realized the collage needed more elements, so it wouldn't look unfinished or plain. As I was deciding on the placement of the light lavender element, I noticed two things. First, I wanted to use this paper because I love the color and the pattern, but placing it in this area would make it blend in with the pink paint and the book pages. There wouldn't be any contrast between all three light values. I decided to bring in two darker elements to balance this area. The second thing, after I finished that area, then the blue element looked plain. So I decided to add more elements there as well. I'm happy with the way this collage turned out. I'm glad I added more elements to the original design. There is room to add more, but I'm going to leave this simple collage as is. This is another collage that is mostly light value. In previous videos, I mentioned that I wanted to start creating collages that either lean heavily light or dark in value. I tend to create collages that have evenly balanced values or strong mid-tone values. This is a style of ground layer to create if you have a lot of time. It almost looks finished at this stage, but needs more elements to enhance the design. I'm using this collage as inspiration to give me ideas on geometric shapes that can be used. I won't be copying the design. The challenge will be to cut the shapes into the right size to fit in certain areas on the ground layer. I did a lot of measuring, cutting, and recutting certain shapes. I edited most of that out to save time. You will see some of it though. Also, I pulled a lot of papers, but in a limited color palette to match the ground layer. So there are pattern papers in blues, reds, and whites. I suggest if you're working with a limited color palette to pull a lot of different papers so you have options. This collage is a lot busier than my usual style, but I like it. Besides having more light or dark value leaning collages, I want to push myself to create busier designs. My style has been simple for so long because it conveys comfort or calmness to me. I think it's time to create more outside that style. I know it'll be a gradual process. When you look at the grayscale version, it becomes easier to see that this busy design collage has all three values. Also note that instead of seeing two layers, the ground and collage, it looks like one cohesive collage. For this next one, I'm returning to my usual simple style. I'm interested in seeing this inspirational collage design larger. Let's see if this design will stay the same or if I'll have to add more elements. It became clear very quickly that this collage will need more elements than the inspirational collage. The main reason was that I didn't cut the dark purple element large enough. In the inspirational collage, you can see that the brown element covers more of the white paper. I don't want to say that cutting the dark purple shape too small was a mistake. It's more of an opportunity to add more elements to elevate the design. Adding a few more elements did elevate the design. I'm glad there's still a lot of the ground layers showing because I like the pattern. I could add even more elements. I decided to leave it as is because I like this design. This is another inspirational collage that I want to see the design larger. I like the contrast between the cut and torn elements, so I want to keep that. But I knew that when I chose it, I wanted to make some minor changes. I like the color pencil ground layer, so at least one of the larger elements will be smaller. Also, I'm switching up the papers for this first element. I still have the original paper, but it won't be the only one I use for it. I wanted to create it with more paper since it'll be larger than the one in the inspirational collage. There's more room to add more paper to elevate the shape. As I create this collage, you'll see that I add more papers to the other elements as well. I don't have anything else to say at this point, so I'll add music and come back when it's finished. I think this 4.5 by 6-inch design looks good scaled up to 8 by 11 inches. It helped that all three of the main elements were created with multiple papers. I think the grayscale version is very striking. I like this colorway. If you watch part 1 of this series, you know there was another ground layer that could have used the radial composition. I wanted to save that composition for this ground layer instead. I didn't want to duplicate any compositions because I mainly wanted to use the 4.5 by 6-inch collages as inspiration. This inspirational collage is a very loose interpretation of the radial composition. Typically, there's a center point that the elements or paint radiate outwards in all directions. I chose it mainly for the color palette. I wanted to see how the collage would look with muted painted papers on top of the light gray and black ground layer. Like the inspirational collage, I'm cutting narrow elements in different lengths and widths. This collage is a different style for me. I have created radial composition collages before, but not one with this type of color contrast. This is another striking grayscale version that would work in this colorway. I chose this inspirational collage because of the vertical composition. I like the block shape elements as well as the singular small angle element. Since the ground layer is 8 by 11 inches, I'll use larger shapes and add more elements than in the inspirational collage. Also, I'll use black and white papers and bring in bright colored ones like this white and purple paper. In the inspirational collage, the angle element is small and light value. For this collage, I wanted the angle element to be more pronounced. I'll wait to glue this element until the other elements that will cover the white paper are glued. Then I'll add accent elements. One more thing before I add music. The one pink, long, thin element in the inspirational collage is striking against the other elements that are black, white, and gray. For this collage, I want more of a balance between all colors. This is another collage that could be in the same series as the inspirational collage and different enough to stand on its own. This is another grayscale version that is a good colorway. This journal style ground layer is a perfect match with a horizontal composition. As I mentioned in a video about different compositions, you can have a single horizontal line or multiples. I'm choosing multiples for this collage because I want to cover a lot of the writing that's on the paper. I only want hints of words showing through the collage elements. Also, I pulled color papers to match the colors mentioned in the journal entry: plum, lavender, orange, and yellow. The horizontal stripes of colors will be placed in the opposite location than how I listed them on the journal entry. The darkest plum will be at the top, moving downwards to the yellow at the bottom. I'm taking creative license to add a few circles in different colors. These color circles are loosely representing the moon and the sun. Before I add music, I want to mention that this collaging section took a bit longer than the others. It took time to carefully choose different papers of each color to show the transition from dark plum to lavender, to dark orange to light orange, and finally yellow. This is a good example of turning a journal entry into a collage. It's close to a literal interpretation, but you can take it more abstract as well. You can do the same thing with the lyrics to a song or a poem or a section of a book that has a strong meaning to you. The colors and element shapes can help to convey the meaning. I encourage you to give this one a try. Last year I started exploring what I call abstract people. I had to include at least one in this series and thought this ground layer would be a good match. Opposite of what I did for the last collage, I wanted to leave enough of the ground layer showing for this one so the viewer can read the words. Instead of the head and body shapes cut as solid pieces of paper, I'm cutting thin shapes of each. Like drawing an outline, these shapes will frame the sections of the ground layer. I'm not gluing down the abstract person right away. Block shape elements will be glued around it first. It's easier to cut those elements to size first, then try to line up the ends against the already glued head and body shapes. Also, I won't cover the whole area with those elements. I want to leave some of the ground layer showing around the person as well. This is another long section, so I'll add music while you watch me create this collage and come back when it's finished. This collage was fun to create. I'm slowly making abstract people collages that I can use for references for larger artwork. I like the grayscale version as well. We're wrapping up this 3-part series with this final ground layer. Out of all the writing styles, asemic writing is my favorite. I like the idea of writing down my thoughts in a way that no one can read it. Also, asemic writing can be seen as a pattern rather than words. As I did for a few other collages in this series, I'm painting on the ground layer to create the shape of the large element instead of using paper. I'll use paper for the other elements. I chose purple paint so it will contrast with the white and pink ground layer. I decided on this inspirational collage to see how the design would look scaled up to 8 by 11 inches. If you've watched the other videos in this series, you know that I've done this a lot. It's something that I like to do in my art practice. I take a sketch or a small collage, then scale it up larger to see if the design works in that size. Since there's more area to cover, I'll add more elements for this collage. I think this design is successful in a larger size. It helps that there are more horizontal elements. I also like that there's a small sliver of asemic writing visible above the paper elements. I hope you like this series of videos. I encourage you to try different styles of ground layers in your art practice, explore and have fun. Let me know if you have any questions. Thanks for watching. Take care.